Right this second, we're closer than ever. Whether we're spread across town, across Africa, or across an ocean, we're merely separated by a moment. In an instant, we can send support, feed a passion, or strengthen a bond. It's the connections between us that power Chipper Cash. As 1 million users on Chipper becomes millions, the possibilities for what we can achieve together are endless.
My name is Ham, and I'm the co-founder of Chipper Cash. With Chipper, we've built the first platform of its kind to process completely free and instant cross-border money transactions in Africa. In the 5 months since our launch, we've processed over 90,000 financial transactions. We have over 30,000 active users, and more importantly, we're growing at over 100% month over month. Now, the reality is, Chipper isn't just about saving people money. We're about improving the lives of hundreds of millions of people living in Africa. We're about removing barriers and connecting families together. Families like that of Geoffrey. Geoffrey is a 45-year-old man that lives in Kenya, far away from his wife who lives in Uganda. Now, believe it or not, most people in Africa don't have bank accounts. Instead, they use mobile money. The challenge, however, is that mobile money has some serious limitations. Firstly, it's expensive. Every transaction incurs a fee. Secondly, mobile money doesn't support cross-border transactions. And thirdly, mobile money is not interoperable, meaning every carrier operates a closed system. The bottom line is, Geoffrey can't use mobile money to send money to his wife in Uganda. This is exactly what we've been able to solve with Chipper. Today, like never before, Geoffrey is using Chipper to send money to his wife in Uganda, instantly, for free, and across borders. And in doing so, he's able to support his family. I couldn't be more proud to be part of the team that's doing this most important work. Myself, my co-founder, and our CTO have all worked with some of the largest, most innovative tech companies in the world. So just to recap, in the 5 months since our launch, we've processed over 90,000 financial transactions. We have over 30,000 active users, and more importantly, we're growing at over 100% month over month. And this is just the beginning. We're available in 5 countries today, and we're expanding globally. So I invite you to join us and make a lasting impact on the lives of 1 billion people living in Africa.
Chipper is an all-inclusive financial platform that really is aimed at being intertwined in the fabrics of people's financial lives living in Africa. It includes being able to send peer-to-peer payments across borders, being able to invest in assets like crypto or US fractional stocks, being able to use Visa cards on online payments, as well as interact with businesses via our API and B2B suite of products.
We're in Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, and we also live in the US and the UK. Nigeria, Uganda are 2 of the biggest markets, but all of the markets are growing very, very quickly.
I think it was born out of both of our experiences growing up in Africa. I'm born and raised in Uganda, and Megan is born and raised in Ghana, and we met in college. And one thing that really brought us together was this idea that we've grown up seeing firsthand many problems people face living in Africa. And one of the biggest, most prevalent one to us was sending money and how difficult that was.
You see how easy it is to Venmo someone money, but then it's literally impossible to send money from Ghana to Uganda. The cost of doing it is more than the amount that you want to send. And so we started specifically with this we would solve an intra-African payments. We started in Uganda and Ghana, expanded to Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, and that's where the biggest value is. And now we're expanding to the US and the UK because of the same cost. When I moved to the US as a student, my dad had to figure out how to send me money from Ghana to the US, and that was just a ridiculous process. It involved like informal people sending back and forth. But with Chipper, it's significantly easier. You can move very low value instantly and almost for free.
You have some countries that are predominantly mobile money based or mobile money centric financial services, like Uganda, Kenya. A lot of East Africa has gone quite far with mobile money. And then in West Africa, I think bank accounts are more prevalent, and that's the predominant financial instrument for most people. And then there's still a very large number of people who still don't have access to any of those solutions. So typically referred to as unbanked or underbanked. And you sort of factor that in with the fact that there's 54 different currencies in Africa. So there is a cross-currency issue as well. Irrespective of if you had the right infrastructure to support money moving, you have to handle the illiquidity of those currencies and a multitude of other issues, but those are sort of the big ones. So you sort of put that together, it creates a situation where it's very hard and expensive to move money from one system in one country to another. Solving the problem required kind of solving all those pieces separately, and hence that's kind of what made it difficult. And to this day, I think it's still very difficult, and there's still a long way to go in solving each of those pieces.
Do you remember how we met? I remember how we met. It was in the cornfields in Iowa, Grinnell College, obviously. And it was actually one of those random afternoons on the stairs of the science building, and you took me under your wing with AppDev was one of these phenomenal groups on campus and made all these amazing apps. It was a great place to be as an up-and-coming computer science student.
I think I remember that conversation that stairwell because I remember I was going somewhere and we spent way longer than I would have thought, in a stairwell just talking to some guy who was from Uganda. At least for me, I'm sure for you too, it was clear we wanted to do something together.
Right.
Obviously, we didn't know what it was. One of the seeds that brought Chipper to life, I remember I was back home. My brother, who was literally building websites for clients, he's in the modern economic system for all intents and purposes, and he tries to use his card to just pay for web hosting. And it gets declined. Actually, it doesn't get declined, it goes through. But then they end up refunding it for fraud reasons.
Because it's in Ghana.
Yeah, where based on your IP address, you are not allowed to be included in the modern economic world. And there's nothing wrong that you've done. You're trying to work so hard to change your narrative, but you can't because of institutions. That's one of the things about Bitcoin and permissionless innovation, the idea that we can build something that actually works and actually empowers people. That's the core genesis of really where Chipper started. We've got to build a service that actually works.
Yeah.
So we were working on Chipper on the side. Really the first version was, you had 2 wallets and it was using the Bitcoin rails behind the scenes. I got to Ghana, we showed that to a couple of my friends, and everyone immediately resonated with this idea of a free P2P network, and we've just been iterating on that ever since.
For us at the time, we knew we needed, access to talent, capital, be in an environment where we could, learn from others who've done similar audacious things. Being away from it, we knew would make the whole endeavor harder, and we knew that to have the highest chance to likely be successful, being back in the US was important. All right, Majid, what are our values as a company?
So first one is lead with empathy. The second one is communicate to develop trust. The third one is be an owner. And the fourth is be bold.
So, one of the values I just love about our company is being bold. That's a key part of our values that I think, for me, I make sure we try to keep as we keep growing, because as we, tackle all these problems, what's still very true as it was back then, is we've only scratched the surface of what we're doing. There's just so much more to do, right? Today we have over 5 million users, but we want to have over 500 million one day. And, we want to do so much more and be in so many more countries. And I think to get there from here is going to require a lot more will and intention and deliberation about our purpose. We've always had very big visions and goals for the company, right? We always knew even back then that we wanted to do more than cross-border payments. We wanted to essentially be intertwined with the fabric of people's financial lives in Africa. And we knew this was a way to get in, cross-border payments and scale and build more on top of that. But it was never the summation of our goals as far as Chipper went. It's something that we've had from the very beginning, right? This
very large vision of what we can do and how much we can impact people's lives with a very powerful platform financially that for so long just didn't exist, right? No one really built sophisticated, high-quality services for an entire continent.
Right, yeah, the narrative then was that, oh, that's a thing for that part of the world.
Right.
It's not really a thing for us. If you're sending money to you, of course there's a fee. Like the idea that I could send money to you for no fees is just mind-blowing for a number of folks. If you can handle uncertainty, you can handle the fact that you're going to wake up tomorrow and something's changed, literally from beneath you, and you can thrive in that version of chaos and bring order to it versus someone else bringing order to it, you're gonna do really well. And quite frankly, you're also gonna feel like, wow, I can't believe I tamed this beast, so to speak, and feel very proud about it.
There is something to be said about how we encourage people to not be worried too much about failure. And obviously, I think no one wants to fail, person or organization. But I think there's something powerful about embracing it as an agent for growth. And if you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, there's no how-to manual. You'll probably run into walls a lot of times. And I think having the mental capacity to accept that as part of the process serves someone in a company like Chipper quite well, regardless of what function they're in, right? The idea that the first thing you do likely won't be the best or the final thing, but allowing yourself that ability to evaluate, change, iterate, I think is a very powerful aspect of being successful in a company like this where we're doing very many new things and very many things for the first time. My dad did IT and he did computer science in college. He has an IT farm. And for me, growing up, I was always fascinated by IT and what it can do to change the world. So coming to Silicon Valley as a freshman in college for my summer was an exciting experience. And for me, I fell in love with the place. Its willingness to support all sorts of ideas and a community where nothing is looked down as crazy or a weird idea. Everything is encouraged. People are risk takers. Everyone's trying to do something exciting. So being in that space for the summer was great for me as a 21. Oh, wait, no, I think I was 20 at that time. Yeah, I was a 20-year-old. After that, I was committed that, this is what I wanted to do, be part of tech. And so I got an internship at Facebook. Again, one of my college summers, I think I was a junior at the time. That was my first foray into big tech, working in big tech. And after I graduated, I worked at Facebook for 2 years. But that was actually in Dublin, Ireland. I moved to Europe. 2 years, yeah. I worked at the Irish headquarters, which was a fun experience as well. But then 2 years after that, I moved back to the Bay Area to start Chipper. Really, the story kind of started actually in college because my co-founder, who I met in college, is also from Africa. He's born and bred in Ghana. I'm born and bred in Uganda. I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier. We met in college. He was 2 years older than me, so he was a junior when I was a freshman. We hit it off in terms of how aligned we were, in the sense that we strongly believe that growing up in Africa, we had all these experiences and these insights around some of the problems that still faced a lot of Africans. And having the privilege of being trained and educated and exposed to life in the West, we felt gave us a really great opportunity to sort of marry those two things, bridge those two worlds and build a solution that could impact a lot of people at scale. And so we tinkered with a few projects while in college, and after we graduated, we stayed in touch and kept thinking about what areas can we make an impact in. And payments within Africa was a clear opportunity to go and take a stab at doing something there. No one had really done anything around payments within Africa. Most of the focus had really just been around remittances. We were quite aligned in that sense. And in 2018, that's when I made the move and said, all right, this is important enough. And I think the time is right. Felt that I'd spent at Facebook, I felt would have, in many ways, been too costly in terms of missing the opportunity that we thought existed in the market at the time. 2018 is when I moved back to the Bay Area. That's when we really put our efforts into full force and launched the company.
It's a pretty ambitious undertaking for two guys to say, hey, look, let's tackle payments for an entire continent. What were sort of the first steps to building this? And also, I would love to hear a little more about the current state of payments was. Like, you would think that around the world, payments would be somewhat standardized and that many of these big players like the Venmos and Squares and all the big guys would be there, but it doesn't seem like that was the case.
Yeah, it wasn't the case. And I'll get to that in a minute. But you are
100% correct in saying that it was definitely it was quite audacious for two 20-year-old first-time founders, African guys coming out of Silicon Valley and trying to do something. And I think for us, like people say ignorance is bliss, and that statement is incredibly true. For us, we were just obsessed with what we saw as the opportunity. And we didn't really spend too much time worrying about all the incredible obstacles that were in front of us. I mean, we had to figure out a lot of things. Immigration was one of those things. Both myself and my co-founder at the time were out of the country before we started Chippers. We had to figure out how do we get our immigration in order and, could move back to the US and work, getting the company off the ground, trying to raise money. So there was a number of really large obstacles. In hindsight, if you looked at objectively, you'd think that you'd be incredibly stupid and crazy to try and do this. Like I said, to us, it was important enough that we wanted to take a stab at it. And we felt quite strongly that we had a working solution. And to your question around sort of the landscape at the time, I think, again, in many ways, what just was unbelievable to us was that we take so many things for granted here, people who live in the US or in Western Europe or pretty much in the West, around how easy it is to interact with your money. You go into a coffee shop and you can swipe your card, you can use Apple Pay, you go get lunch somewhere and you can Venmo a friend after you flip check. It's just really easy, and you take for granted how seamless that is. A lot of people in the world still don't have that level of convenience around how they interact with their money. In Africa, it's still in many ways in the early stages of that space evolving. Mobile money, which was launched with M-Pesa in Kenya, has done tremendous work in lifting people out of poverty and just improving the social economic order of things, in particularly in Kenya and Eastern Africa, how accessible it made formal financial services. And that's just kind of getting from 0 to 1, from people being able to actually digitally send money from one person to another and not having to store, hordes of cash under their beds or in physical cash, and being able to digitize that. But then how do you get from 1 to 10? How do you then enable people to not just be able to store money digitally and send it to a few people, but be able to send it across borders, be able to make online payments, be able to access other instruments like savings or investments and whatnot. And to us, that's what we looked at and said, wow, in 2020 or 2018 at the time in San Francisco is so much farther ahead than the rest of the world that sometimes you forget and take things for granted. But that represents the opportunity that lies in being a part of the solution for a lot of people who don't have access to these formal services. And that really was the driving force behind Chipper.
Tell me a little bit about what were the first steps? Was it just two guys starting to code out of a bedroom in San Fran? I mean, that seems pretty ambitious. What was the original vision? This wasn't that long ago, 2 years. Is it in line with the same idea you have today?
Absolutely. It's still the same. And the vision has always been to make it incredibly easy, cost efficient for people in Africa to send money across borders. Africa has the highest cost of sending money in the world. It's the most expensive to send money in Africa than anywhere else in the world. And so that's a huge barrier. It's, incredibly fragmented. There's, different solutions in different countries that all don't speak with each other in terms of, interoperability. So just being able to say, we're building a platform that can let someone in Nigeria send money to someone in another country very easily, that vision still remains true today. But, first steps, I think, as with anything, is just trying to learn more, understand exactly what you're getting into. So, whenever I'd go back home for the holidays, I'd spend a lot of time just talking to people and seeing what people on the ground were using and people's expectations and where the space was at the time. Because I think the things that make any company being launched more likely to succeed versus fail goes beyond just technical ability of the founders or the idea and the strength of the idea, but it also involves, I think, being in the right time and at the right place. And I think a lot of things have to be right in so many ways for a solution to have a chance to succeed. If you look at any industry or any company that's scaled quite well, Jeff Bezos says all the time, if you look at Amazon, that he was able to launch Amazon at that time because there was a bunch of other infrastructure that was laid before Amazon that Amazon could leverage, whether it was, the shipping industry, the mail industry in the US, or the internet being available, or payments being at a point where people could pay online. Those are important things that had to happen and be in that place for Amazon to succeed. If you tried to launch Amazon in 1969, it wouldn't have been successful because you wouldn't have had, the advancements in payments and the internet and shipping to support that sort of thing. And I think the same thing is true for any industry, and particularly for us. The industry being at a point where we could, build on top of existing solutions that weren't there 10, 20 years ago has a strong impact on if we'll be able to scale something, in a meaningfully successful way or not.
What was sort of the offering when you guys rolled it out? Walk us through kind of how you envisioned it working.
Imagine how you use your Venmo today or your PayPal. In addition to Venmo just working in the US, try to imagine if it actually worked across the world. If you could Venmo someone in Europe or someone in Asia, that's what Chipper is to people in sub-Saharan Africa. That's the intention of what we want it to be. It's a platform. It's a P2P app where you can connect various payment methods. It could be a bank account. It could be a mobile money account. And you can use that to credit and debit your Chipper wallet. And when the money's in your Chipper wallet, you can send it to someone else pretty easily, the same way you'd send a text, or the same way people in the US would use Venmo or PayPal. And again, one of the things I just want to emphasize is I think exposure is powerful because it kind of shows you in many ways things that you take for granted. Those 2 years I spent in Dublin, in Europe, I remember so many times telling people if we'd go out for drinks or whatever, and afterwards, whoever picked up the tab want to pay them. And I would say, do you have something like Venmo? And the concept of an app that did peer-to-peer payments was so foreign to them. In Europe, you have to go into typically your bank has an app that you use to send to someone else, but you have to get their bank account number first, then you can send it to them via your bank app. It's not as seamless as Venmo is. And that's Europe, right? But even in Europe, the idea of peer-to-peer payments hasn't quite caught on the way it has in America. That exposure sort of puts in perspective how sometimes, we assume that because something works very easily where we are, that's the case for everyone else in the world. And so building the product initially to be able to just do that very basic peer-to-peer sending of money for us was our key objective and remains our key objective. That's an important problem for us to solve. And we knew how broad it was just because of our own life experiences growing up in Africa and seeing how many people had to pay really high fees or stand in very long lines to send money to another country.
What was the major hurdles in building it? Why was it so hard? Is it regulatory? Is it coordinating with all the various financial intermediaries? Is it banking related? Kind of walk us through all the challenges and struggles. I know we only have an hour. Why is this so hard? Why was this an unsolved problem in 2018?
I think the main ones are, and I think at a macro level, it's mostly around the ecosystem and how the ecosystem plays a really big part in different solutions scaling well or not. And it's very hard for a company to be both vertical and horizontal. And what I mean by that is in every industry, most companies often have to work with another partner to support a part of their business that they shouldn't spend time building out. For example, the reason why Stripe is powerful is because it takes away the need for every e-commerce company to build a payments system in their product. And so that company can just focus on what they do well, which is, if it's making shoes or if it's food delivery or whatever it might be. If a company has to focus on what its core product is, and then also build out everything else it needs to rely on, whether it's payments or infrastructure, for example, again, AWS is another example, right? A lot of internet companies today don't have to worry about how do I build out all these servers and all the, the software that will run on those machines and redundancies and all those things, because Amazon can do that for you. And all you have to do is focus on building your product and leveraging the existing scale of AWS. But if you had to do both those things, if you had to build your product and then also build infrastructure to support the back end, it just makes you that less efficient, makes it that more difficult because then you have a lot less resources to do what really you want to do. And I think the ecosystem, in many ways, being very young, I think is probably the biggest, hurdle and remains the biggest hurdle today for a lot of people that are building exciting solutions, whether it's in Africa or Southeast Asia or many of these emerging markets. It's that you have to build your product, but then you have to build everything else that supports your product. Even if there's solutions that might support you in that regard, many of them are still very, very young. And aren't mature enough yet that they can scale as fast as you want them to scale, and things break very frequently, and you have to have even more redundancies than you need to have. And so those things all require more time, more capital. They distract from what you actually want to focus on, which is your product, and altogether make the whole, endeavor that much more difficult. So I think that still remains to be the biggest piece to, I think, emerging markets as a whole, eventually being able to have robust ecosystems and make scaling products very efficient. You have every other problem that comes with running a business, which is, how do you actually get your first customers? How do you, raise money? How do you actually build technology that can scale? How do you put together a team that can do what you need, what you need to get done? And so all those things, in addition to everything I mentioned about the ecosystem.
How'd those first transactions happen? Was it through app-based? And kind of talk about how you did eventual launch and rollout.
First, V1 of our product was actually web-based. We had a very basic web, essentially, interface. And the reason why we did it that way is because at that time, we didn't have, we had too many things to worry about, and we didn't have the time and ability to focus on building the native apps, iOS and Android. So a web solution was the silver bullet at the time in inverted commas, because it wasn't really a solution, but it allowed us to put out a product out there that early adopters could use. The earliest people were, again, it was very much word of mouth, talked to a few friends, my family, talked to a few other people, and just really collecting feedback and saying, what do people like about this? What do they not like about this? Is it actually solving the problem that we think it should be solving? And those initial, 10, 20, 30, maybe even 100 users were incredibly informative in us being able to say, these are the areas that we need to double down on as far as reducing pain points for people. And this is where there's going to be a bit of a challenge in terms of whether it's relying on a third-party partner or just us having to figure out a solution for that particular problem. But the first, let's say, couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months, it was a very primitive web-based solution. And then we made a big push and launched the Android app, because Android is by far the most prevalent operating system in Africa. We got the app out there. That made a huge difference in terms of how seamless it was for people to use the product and how much more they actually enjoyed the experience. So we're able to get higher quality feedback. It helped growth a little bit. And then we decided to focus a little bit on getting some press in local media outlets and trying to increase our visibility, kind of take it a step at a time in that sense. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of first-time founders like ourselves would make most times is trying to just get from 0 to 100. There's actually a very important process of going from 0 to 1 first, because you get some very high quality feedback. And if you can get the first, couple hundred people very happy with your product, then they'll bring on the rest. But if you just rush and try to get as many as possible and it's a bad experience, then you put yourself in a hole that you don't want to, to have to work yourself out of.
What was the initial rollout? Was it in Uganda?
Yes, Uganda was the first market we launched in. A few weeks after that, we launched in, maybe about a month or so after that, we launched in Kenya. Those were the first two markets we launched in 2018. But Uganda was the first. I remember the day we actually put the app out there and started to see initial reactions from people. And I remember having a very lengthy discussion / debate with my co-founder at the time. His viewpoint at the time was that we need to highlight that this is a beta, because the app was still very buggy and we're still trying to figure out a lot of things. So he wanted to add beta in the app store. And I said, if you put beta, no one's going to use it, because the trust element that gets very hard to overcome at that point. And went back and forth around, should we put beta or not? And then eventually I was able to convince him, and we didn't put beta, put it out there, and started to get some really high quality feedback. Those initial people were so important to us. Every user today is very important to us, but my co-founder and I were quite obsessed with giving people a very good experience. That's one thing that we never compromise on. I would literally physically call every single user we had and say, hey, we noticed you opened the app and you did this, but you didn't complete the action. Did something happen? Did it break? Stay up late at night, phone calls with users and trying to see, what was happening, and just making sure that every single user at the time knew that we were serious about this, but then also that we would listen to them if they didn't like something about the product. That was a very interesting experience. In many ways, it allowed us to hear more in terms of what people actually liked and didn't like. That's an important part of the whole development cycle of anything. Those were exciting times in many ways. Part of me actually misses that direct connection to people sometimes, to users sometimes. But when you scale, which every business wants, there's some things that you can't keep scaling. So
Good morning, and welcome to this special Chipper event. It is through events like this that we bring to the world some of our most important products. Today, we're launching a revolutionary product, US fractional stocks.